Hello and welcome to another one of my videos. In this one I'm going to be advancing on from melanin and photosynthesis to a very exciting finding. Now also combining the fourth state of water. Now remember, the fourth state of water is where you have gas, liquid and solid. Well, between liquid and solid there is actually a fourth kind of water, which is a liquid crystalline water. It basically layers up to about 200 nanometers thick on an aqueous surface, a surface that accepts water, due to the infrared or light rays, infrared mostly, that breaks the hydrogen off one of the water molecules, and then 6 of those oxygen with one hydrogen then link and turn into a hexagon. Then those hexagons, the hydrogen and oxygens, have enough attraction in them to then layer up like plates. One hydrogen, then they about 60 degrees different, and they'll layer up like a stack of plates. But because they are not solid like in a solid ice state, which is the those plates that stack up oxygen over oxygen, hydrogens over hydrogens, well, they go hydrogen over oxygen, oxygen over hydrogen, and there's enough attraction for them to be in a crystallized structure, but they're not in contact, so they still remain liquid. Now that has, I have said in the past, has a lot to do with, they have even started making batteries with this, because the cumulative effect of that layering of the water, the hexagonal water linked half molecules or molecules, makes a negative charge. I think it is, cumulatively count up all the electrons and things, and you get a negative charge, and then all the hydrogens that have been let off in the liquid water that is outside that 200 nanometer zone has a cumulative positive charge. Now, because of that difference of the positive and negative charge within the water itself, if you put an electrode in the negative Z layer and a positive water layer, then you'll get electrons flowing to try and even out or balance out that disparity, and you'll get an electrical flow. Now, the batteries that they are trialing at the moment, they got a conductive porous material that only has pores of about 50 nanometers, so that the pores fill completely with crystalline water, and because it's conductive, it is now electric. So all you have to do now is put another electrode in the water that's surrounding that porous material, and you will get an electron flow, in other words electricity flowing in that porous material. Now apply this to the photosynthesis and the melanin, and on to the next one, is that with photosynthesis the plants do exactly the same thing. Photons come in from the sunshine and knock an electron into one of the hydrogen spaces, and therefore liberates the hydrogen and off both of them, so it gets rid of those hydrogen and has those hydrogens with an extra electron, making them an ionized hydrogen ion. And then it uses those hydrogen ions to join to other things like NDPs and all that sort of thing, so that it can now transport that hydrogen with the extra electron and then use the electrons in other processes by using that electronic energy. Melanin is the equivalent in human beings, which is the brown coloring in our skin, our hair and in the back of our retinas, that also having light, mostly infrared light, that knocks an electron, the photons knock an electron into the water molecule, filling up a space that the hydrogen is occupying, and then liberates that off, and so now you've got hydrogen ions floating around and oxygen with less, either one or no hydrogens, so you're getting hydrogen and oxygen, same thing, photosynthesis. So we have photosynthesis occurring in our human body, but with a brown material, melanin, rather than the green chlorophyll in a plant. So that's a summary of all of that for those of you who haven't looked at those other videos. That's a rough summary of that. Now, as I was investigating different things and looking at motors and electrics and all that sort of thing and how they work, and it came across our YouTube feeds and all the rest of it, bacteria that have motors, literal physical motors made out of protein that make their tails spiral and gives them propulsion. And then I got another video of the way that the ATP in our mitochondria is formed. Now, if you an ATP and an ADP. An ADP is adenine diphosphate. It's got two adenine plus two phosphates. And in the mitochondria, through the Krebs cycle, they were saying up until now that you have extra through a supposed hydrogen pump, a proton pump they're calling it, which they're wrong, and I'll point this out and show you later. And it makes this protein motor in the mitochondria that spans the inner membrane, and by it spinning, it physically takes an ADP, a diphosphate, gets another phosphate and joins it together with an electron, turning it into an adenine triphosphate. And that is a common currency throughout the body for transport of energy. Whenever a system needs some energy, it will break that phosphate off and use that electron in a process with the energy generated and flowed and all that sort of stuff. Now, up until now, in biology, high school, they had figured out the Krebs cycle, the citric cycle, which is the breakdown of glucose. When we eat sugar, glucose, fructose, whatever, but eventually glucose, the glucose that the plant has assembled, the human body does a deconstruction or deassembling of that glucose molecule. Outside of the mitochondria, in the cell, the glucose is split into two pyruvates, and then that is taken into the mitochondria, and in the mitochondria has an outside membrane and an inner wiggly membrane, and then the interior they're filled with water. Now in the membrane of that mitochondria, the pyruvate, which is half of the glucose, is then disassembled through various steps, breaking off breaking it apart and transporting the electrons around. Now, up until now, they have thought that one of the steps is that it eventually gets the hydrogen with an extra electron, turning it into a hydrogen ion, that they are saying up until now anyway that it is then pushed out of the inner membrane, because the cells and proteins are in that membrane. Instead of putting it inwards, it puts it outwards, creating an imbalance of hydrogen ions. Now, where they are wrong is naming the thing wrong. Now, the ATP synthase, which is the protein that creates the ATP, it says that it is a proton pump that makes it spin. That protons, supposedly from between the outer and the inner membrane, pass by the motor, making it spin. Now, they're entirely wrong in their naming, because it's not a proton. A proton is in the nucleus of an atom with a neutron, and then has its balancing electron outside of the nucleus. So that's what a proton is. They call it a proton because it's a hydrogen with one proton in its nucleus with two electrons on the outside orbiting. Now, that is, to me, absolutely horrendous that they call it a proton when it's actually a hydrogen ion. So I would like to see the whole scientific community get rid of that error, a grave error of calling it a proton pump, and call it a hydrogen ion pump, if that is what is actually happening. Now, in my finding of that they are wrong in their naming of the pump. It's the imbalance of electrons in the inner and outer membranes of the mitochondria. I consulted with my friends, the motor rewinders, asking if it is possible to have a hydrogen ion based motor. They said yes, it is possible, but you need a lot of hydrogens. But what is more likely and more common in most motors, nearly all of them, is that they're using electrons. And the electrons move, and they don't have to move far. They've just got to vibrate to set up the magnetic field that allows the energy from the universe to flow within that magnetic field that the electrons set up in them moving, vibrating, or whatever. So it is more likely that there's an electron base there. Now, I got to thinking, well, that's a little bit to think about. And if they're right about the hydrogen pump, then they are thinking that the hydrogen ions come from the Krebs cycle, the breakdown of glucose, and are populating between the two membranes of the mitochondria. But I thought to myself, well, I haven't heard about the fourth state of water. I looked up on the net or consulted an AI, I think it was, and found that the distance between the outer membrane of the mitochondria and the inner membrane is only about 6 to 8 nanometers. So that means that from the outer surface and the inner surface, there's going to be a fourth layer of water, crystalline water in its fourth state, that will coat all of that interior and fill it with negative charge, much like that battery I was telling you about before. Now, the inside of the mitochondria is still small, but it's larger, and if you have the ATP synthase going through the inner membrane, it has its butt stuck up in the negatively charged crystalline water and has its head down where it joins the phosphates together, is down in the positive or more positive charged water. So that means just by having hydrogens from your glucose or from the fourth state of water building up, you're getting a negatively charged layer of water that is now going to encourage electrons to flow through the ATP synthase to make it spin. So yes, I think that maybe our food is contributing to the hydrogen and therefore the negatively charged space there. But I'm thinking that it is possible that the fourth state of water has more to do with creating that electrical current flow through the ATP synthase rather than the food. That's an interesting thought to think about, because it means that it's possible that a lot of our energy created by and captured by the mitochondria and turned into ATP may come from the ambience rather than the food we eat. I definitely think that the food contributes to what we are gaining, but I think there is also ambient energy at play there as another photosynthesis kind of concept. I don't know how much that is and how much the current flow is and how much it's contributing, and I will be investigating that more, but it's a very interesting concept. As I say, to find out that their naming of a proton pump is absolutely bull. It's just absurd to call it a proton pump. Get your terminology right, scientists. It's a hydrogen ion pump, if that's what you are referring to. But on top of that, they obviously don't know about the fourth state of water and the electrical properties of it and the electron flow that is set up by it. I wonder how long it'll take them before the mainstream catches on to it. I think I'm the only one so far that I know about that sort of it, but let's see how long it takes them to figure it out. I thought that was exciting.